Chapter 1. The Unacceptable Gift. James Lorn was 3 days away from turning 50 and didn't know it. That wasn't denial. It wasn't repression. It was simply a fact that hadn't registered as important enough to retain. Dates, like decorations, were optional information, useful to others, not necessary for survival. He arrived at the office at 8:11 a.m., hung his coat on the back of his chair, and booted up his workstation with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything else. His lunch was already packed, his tasks already prioritized. The project deadline sat neatly in his head, partitioned from the rest of his life like a closed door. The morning passed without interruption, which was exactly how he liked it. At noon, James stood, took his lunch bag, and walked toward the break room, expecting nothing more than the low hum of the refrigerator and the polite absence of conversation. Instead, the door swung open and the room exploded. Surprise! Confetti fell. Applause filled the air. Someone cheered too loudly. A banner stretched across the far wall read Happy 50th. James, in aggressively cheerful blue and gold. James stopped. Every face in the room was turned toward him, smiling, expectant, waiting. For a second, his mind tried to process this as a mistake. Someone else's name, someone else's milestone. But then he saw the cake, white frosting, his name spelled carefully in cursive. He saw his manager, Linda, holding a paper plate like an offering. 50. His chest tightened. This wasn't kindness. Kindness was quiet. This was exposure. "Oh, come on," someone said, laughing. "You don't look a day over 40. James didn't hear the rest. The noise blurred into a single invasive sound. He felt every eye on him like a hand on his back, pushing him forward, demanding a response. Say thank you. Smile. Perform gratitude. He didn't. Instead, James turned around and walked out. The room fell silent behind him. The cheer cut off mid-breath like a power failure. He didn't look back. He didn't need to see the confusion to know it was there. He returned to his desk, sat down, and stared at the monitor until the tightness in his chest settled into something manageable. This was the problem. Now they'd done something for him. He hadn't asked. He never asked. But gifts created obligations, and obligations demanded access. Questions would follow. Jokes, pity maybe, judgment definitely. He could already hear it. What's his problem? Ungrateful. We were just trying to be nice. James opened a blank document. He typed his resignation letter in 11 minutes. Clear. Professional. No emotion. He printed it, folded it once, and walked it down the hall to Linda's office. She looked up, startled. James? We were just... He placed the envelope on her desk. I'm resigning. Effective immediately. Her mouth opened, closed. Is this about the party? Yes. Her expression shifted to something wounded. We didn't mean any harm. I know. Then why? Because I don't participate in things I didn't consent to, he said evenly. And I don't want to be discussed. Linda frowned. People care. That's not my responsibility. He turned and left before the conversation could become something else. Something emotional, something that required explanation. Back at his desk, James sat down and resumed work. He finished the project by 3:47 p.m. When he shut down his computer, the office was quieter than usual. Conversations hushed as he passed. Someone tried to meet his eye and failed. Good, he thought. He put on his coat, walked out of the building, and stepped into the late afternoon light with nothing ahead of him but time. For the first time in decades, no one expected him anywhere. And for reasons he couldn't yet name, that felt less like relief than it should have. Chapter 2. The day after quiet, James Lorn woke up at 6:02 a.m. out of habit and lay there staring at the ceiling, mildly irritated that his body hadn't gotten the memo. For 32 years, mornings had meant the same thing. Alarm, shower, coffee, commute, purpose. Today, there was no alarm and no purpose, just a faint gray light leaking through the blinds and the sound of a delivery truck somewhere on the street below. He didn't feel panic. He felt dislocated. James sat up, swung his feet to the floor, and stood. Muscle memory carried him through the motions, shower, shave, dress, until he reached for his work badge out of reflex and found empty air. He paused. That's done, he said aloud, testing the sound of his own voice in the quiet apartment. The words didn't echo, but they lingered. By 8 o'clock, he was fully dressed with nowhere to go. He considered making coffee, then realized he didn't have to rush it. The thought unsettled him more than it should have. He made the coffee anyway, strong and black, and drank it standing at the counter like he always had. Sitting felt indulgent. By 9, the silence had grown teeth. James had always believed solitude was neutral, neither good nor bad. Simply was. But now it felt different, heavier, like a room that had been comfortable when it was temporary and oppressive once it wasn't. He checked his bank balance. Fine. He reviewed his expenses. Manageable. He opened his laptop, then closed it again. There was nothing to do. At 10:17 a.m., he grabbed his coat and left the apartment, telling himself he needed groceries even though the refrigerator was perfectly adequate. The city looked wrong during work hours. Too alive. Too casual. People sat in cafes laughing without urgency. James walked faster, as if he were late for something, though he no longer was. He turned the corner too quickly. The collision was solid, undeniable, and followed by a startled yelp. "Oh wow, okay. That's on me," a woman said as James instinctively stepped back. "I wasn't watching where I was going," he replied automatically. They both froze mid-apology, then looked at each other. She was about his height, maybe a little shorter, with dark hair pulled into a loose knot and glasses perched precariously on her nose. One lens was smudged. She pushed them up with her finger, studying him with open curiosity rather than annoyance. "Well," she said, smiling, "at least we're both polite." James nodded. "Yes." She waited. When he didn't add anything, she laughed softly. "You don't do small talk, do you?" "I don't require it," he said. "Fair enough." She gestured down at the grocery bag that had nearly gone flying. "You saved my eggs. I appreciate that." "You're welcome." Another pause. She tilted her head. "You always this serious? Or did I catch you on a special day?" James hesitated. "Just a day." "Huh." She extended her hand. "Emily." He looked at it for a moment, then shook it. "James. Nice to meet you." James, who doesn't run people over on purpose. "I aim to minimize harm," he said. Her smile widened. "I like that." James wasn't sure why that statement made his chest tighten. They stood there, neither of them moving on, the city flowing around them like water around stones. "So," Emily said eventually, "are you heading somewhere? Or just aggressively walking?" "Errands. Same." She pointed toward the corner cafe. "I'm grabbing coffee first." "You?" "I don't need coffee." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't need it? Or you don't want it?" "I've already had some." "That's not an answer." James frowned slightly. "I don't understand why this is a conversation." Emily laughed again, unoffended. "Because you didn't walk away." That landed. James considered the fact that she was right. He could have nodded, excused himself, and left. He hadn't. "I suppose I have time," he said carefully. "Excellent." She started walking toward the cafe without checking if he'd follow. After a brief internal debate, James did. Inside, the cafe was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon. Emily ordered without hesitation, then looked at him. "You? Black coffee. See? You do want it." "I didn't say that." They sat at a small table by the window. Emily took a sip and sighed contentedly. "So," she said, resting her chin on her hand, "what do you do when you're not running errands in the middle of a workday?" James stiffened. "I was working. Until yesterday." "Oh." Her tone shifted, subtle but real. "What happened yesterday?" "I left my job." "By choice?" "Yes." "Happy about it?" "No." She nodded slowly. "That sounds complicated." "It isn't." "James," she said gently, "everything you've said since we met contradicts that." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Emily didn't push. She didn't fill the silence. She just waited, watching him with quiet interest. "I don't like attention," he said finally. "Most people say that," she replied. "Few mean it the way you do." "I don't like obligations created without consent." "That I respect." "I don't want to be known if it requires performance." Emily smiled, but it was softer now. "That makes sense." The ease with which she accepted his words unsettled him more than resistance would have. They finished their coffee without rushing. When they stood to leave, James felt a strange reluctance, like he was stepping away from something unfinished. "Well," Emily said, adjusting her bag, "this was unexpected." "Yes. Good unexpected or bad?" "I haven't decided." She grinned. "Fair." As they stepped outside, she hesitated. "I'm usually here around this time, if you ever feel like not aggressively walking." James considered the offer. No pressure, no obligation, an opening, not a demand. "I might," he said. She smiled once more, then turned and walked away. James stood there for a long moment before continuing down the street, groceries forgotten, his steps slower than before. For the first time since yesterday, the quiet didn't feel quite as loud. Chapter 3, The Woman Who Asks Questions. James told himself he didn't go back to the cafe on purpose. That was the story he preferred, the one where he was simply walking, thinking, and happened to pass by the same corner at roughly the same time as the day before. Coincidences were acceptable. Intentions were not. It was 10:24 a.m. when he slowed his pace. The cafe windows were fogged slightly from the inside, the familiar cinnamon sugar scent drifting out every time the door opened. He stood across the street for a moment longer than necessary, watching people come and go, then crossed when the light changed. Inside, the noise was gentle and constant. James scanned the room before he could stop himself. Emily sat at the same small table by the window, her coat draped over the back of the chair, a notebook open in front of her. She was frowning at the page, pen paused midair, completely absorbed. He should have left. Instead, he ordered coffee. Black. He was halfway to the pickup counter when she looked up and noticed him. Her expression shifted instantly. Surprise, then amusement, then something that looked like satisfaction but wasn't smug. "Well," she said, standing. If it isn't aggressively walking man. James exhaled through his nose. I was in the area. Of course you were. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. You already ordered. It would be rude not to. He hesitated, then sat. She closed her notebook but didn't move it away. He noticed how she didn't hide it, didn't create distance just because he'd arrived. You look less like you're running from something today, she said. I'm not running. Aha. He frowned. Why do you keep doing that? Doing what? Observing me like I'm a puzzle. Emily smiled, unapologetic. Because you're interesting. I'm not. You walked out of a job midweek and didn't flinch. You avoid attention like it's radioactive. You drink black coffee and claim you don't want it. She shrugged. That's at least mildly interesting. James considered correcting her. Decided against it. Their coffees arrived. He took a sip and stared out the window, grounding himself in the simple familiarity of the taste. So, she said lightly, what's today's errand? I didn't plan one. Her eyebrows rose. No list. No. Wow, that's big. It's temporary. Everything is. That comment landed closer to home than he liked. He shifted. What are you writing? Notes. For people. He glanced at the notebook. You write about strangers? Only the ones who don't mind. I mind. She tilted her head. Then I'll write about how you minded. Despite himself, a corner of his mouth twitched. Emily, he said, choosing his words carefully. What do you want? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him, really studied him, without judgment, without urgency. I want to understand, she said at last. Not to fix, not to pry, just to understand. I don't offer explanations. I didn't ask for one. He met her gaze, searching for the angle, the hook. He found none. That's unusual, he said. People think understanding is ownership, she replied. I don't. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. James realized he wasn't bracing himself, wasn't preparing an exit. Can I ask you something? Emily said. You're going to anyway. She smiled. Why did you leave your job? I told you. I don't like attention. That's not the reason. He stiffened. It's sufficient. It's a symptom, she said gently. Not a cause. James looked away. The truth pressed at him. Not a single memory, but a lifetime of them. Empty houses. Quiet birthdays. Learning early that nothing was promised and everything had a price. I don't like being indebted, he said finally. I don't like owing people gratitude for things I didn't request. Emily nodded slowly. Because gratitude turns into expectation. Yes, and expectation turns into disappointment. Eventually, she leaned back in her chair. You learned that early. James didn't answer. She didn't push. Instead, she said, you know, you're not wrong. That surprised him enough to look back at her. People do use kindness as leverage, she continued. They say, I did this for you, and suddenly you're required to be someone you didn't agree to be. Exactly. But, she added, holding up a finger, not everyone does. That's a risk calculation, James replied. And the cost of being wrong is higher than the benefit of being right. Emily smiled, but this time there was no humor in it. That sounds lonely. He didn't deny it. The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and a burst of laughter. Life continued around them, unbothered by the intensity of the quiet space they occupied. Do you miss it? She asked. Miss what? Having somewhere to go. James considered the question honestly. I miss having something finished by the end of the day. Emily nodded. Purpose without people. Yes, that's hard to sustain forever. I'm not forever, he said. I'm just now. She accepted that too easily. They sat for a while longer, talking about nothing that mattered and everything that did. Books they'd abandoned halfway through. Neighborhoods that felt like home for reasons they couldn't explain. The strange guilt of enjoying a weekday afternoon. When James stood to leave, it felt deliberate, not defensive. This was fine, he said. Emily grinned. High praise. I won't make a habit of it. I wouldn't want you to. He paused. I might be back tomorrow. Her smile softened. I might be here. As he stepped outside, James felt something shift. Not a revelation. Not hope. But the subtle awareness that someone had seen him and hadn't demanded more. For a man who had spent his life guarding the borders of his solitude, that was no small thing. Chapter 4. Boundaries, clearly marked. By the fourth morning, James stopped pretending the timing was accidental. He arrived at the cafe at 10:18 a.m. Give or take a minute, coat buttoned, expression neutral, expectations carefully managed. He told himself this wasn't a habit. Habits implied attachment. This was a temporary alignment of schedules. Nothing more. Emily was already there. She looked up when the bell over the door chimed, her smile appearing not as a reward but as a recognition, which somehow made it worse. You're early, she said. I'm not late, James replied. She laughed, closing her notebook. I'll count that as consistency. He ordered his coffee without looking at the menu. The barista nodded like this was now a known fact about him. James filed that away under mildly irritating developments. They sat. Same table. Same window. Different silence. Emily didn't open her notebook this time. She rested her hands around her mug and watched him in that thoughtful way that suggested she was paying attention without cataloging. "You seem steadier today," she said. "I slept. That helps." He sipped his coffee. "I don't plan on doing this indefinitely." She raised an eyebrow. "Drinking coffee? Coming here." "Good," she said easily. "Neither do I." That caught him off guard. "You don't?" "Nope. Routines get stale." She shrugged. "I like things with an expiration date." James studied her face, searching for irony. Finding none. The tension in his shoulders eased before he noticed it happening. "That's reasonable," he said. She smiled. "You don't say that often." "I say it when it's accurate." They watched a man outside struggle with a grocery cart that refused to cooperate. Emily chuckled. James did not, but he appreciated the symmetry of the moment. "So," she said, "any updates from the world you abandoned?" "No. No calls? No guilt messages. No one owes me anything." "That's one way to look at it. It's the only way I accept." She nodded. "I figured." He glanced at her. "Why?" "Because you don't confuse connection with entitlement." James considered that. "Most people do. Most people are afraid of being irrelevant." "And you?" he asked. Emily smiled faintly. "I've been relevant in ways that cost too much." The honesty of that statement surprised him. He waited, unsure if she'd elaborate. She didn't. "That's fair," he said instead. They fell into conversation that felt almost normal. Books they'd liked but never finished. Movies that had been overhyped. The strange comfort of diners at odd hours. At one point, Emily gestured toward his coat. "You always wear that? It's functional. You know you're allowed to enjoy things." "I enjoy efficiency." She laughed. "Of course you do." There was no edge to it. No mockery. Just amusement. The bell chimed again as someone entered, breaking the rhythm. James checked the time. 11:02. "I should go," he said. Emily nodded. "Okay." No disappointment. No attempt to prolong the moment. That, more than anything, made him hesitate. "You're not going to ask me to stay?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Do you want me to?" "No." "Then why would I?" He stood, oddly grateful. "I'll be here tomorrow," she said. Not as a promise, but as a statement of probability. James paused. "I might not." "That's fine." He left with the unsettling sensation that he had been neither chased nor dismissed. The next day, he didn't go. He took a longer route through the city, wandered into a hardware store he didn't need anything from, spent 15 minutes comparing light bulbs he already owned. It felt important to disrupt the pattern, to prove to himself that nothing had changed. And yet, at 10:30, he found himself glancing at his watch. Annoyed, James went home and cleaned his apartment. Not because it was dirty, but because it was something to complete. At 4:12 p.m., his phone rang. He stared at it like it was an accusation. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. "James, it's Linda. Just call me if you're willing." He deleted it without listening again. On Friday, he returned to the cafe. Emily looked up, smiled once, and went back to her book. No commentary. No acknowledgement of absence. She let him choose whether to sit. He did. "You didn't come yesterday," she said after a moment. "I was busy. With light bulbs." He blinked. "How did you?" "You have that look," she said. The "I did something practical to avoid something emotional" look. He huffed a quiet laugh before he could stop himself. "See?" she said. "Progress. This isn't progress. It's awareness." He shook his head. "You're dangerous." She grinned. "Only if you let me be." They talked about boundaries then, explicitly, carefully. James explained his rules without apology. No surprises. No obligations disguised as kindness. No emotional debt. Emily listened, then said, "Okay. Okay?" He repeated. "Yes. That's it. That's it. You're not going to challenge them?" "I might ask questions," she said, "but I won't cross lines you draw on purpose." He studied her face, searching for conditions. "And if I change them?" he asked. She shrugged. "Then we talk again." It was disarming. The absence of strategy. The refusal to escalate. "You're not trying to get something from me," he said. "No," she agreed. "I'm trying to be here." The simplicity of that sat heavy in his chest. They finished their coffee in companionable quiet. When they stood to leave, James felt the now familiar pause, the moment where something could be asked, offered, risked. He didn't. Neither did she. Outside, Emily zipped her coat. "Same time tomorrow?" James considered it, then nodded once. "Yes." She smiled, not triumphant, not relieved, just pleased. As they parted ways, James walked home slower than usual, aware that his solitude hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. The borders were still there. He had just, for the first time, invited someone close enough to see them. Chapter 5. The birthday he didn't want. James woke before dawn on Sunday with the distinct sensation that something was wrong. Not danger. Not anxiety. Just a low, persistent sense of misalignment, like a chair leg slightly shorter than the others. He lay still, listening to the quiet of the apartment, cataloging sounds out of habit. The refrigerator's hum, a car passing on the street below, the building settling. Then it came back to him. Today. The knowledge arrived without ceremony, unaccompanied by emotion, which was how it always did when the date surfaced. March. Mid-month. One more year added to a number he rarely used. 50. He lay there a moment longer, then got up. There were no calls, no messages. He hadn't told anyone. That part was working as intended. James showered, dressed, made coffee, and drank it standing at the counter, just as he always had. He expected the day to pass unnoticed, which was the only outcome he found acceptable. At 9:45 a.m., he put on his coat and left the apartment. The cafe was already half full when he arrived. Weekend energy replaced weekday drift, families, couples, the low buzz of people who had chosen to be somewhere together. Emily wasn't at the window table. James paused inside the door longer than necessary, scanning the room with a tightness he didn't appreciate. He ordered coffee anyway, then turned, telling himself this was preferable. Expectations were dangerous. This, at least, was clean. James. He turned. Emily stood near the back, coat still on, holding 2 mugs. She smiled when she saw him. Not bright, not performative, just present. "You're early," she said. "So are you." "I was meeting a friend," she replied. She bailed. James hesitated. "I can leave." She studied him for a second, then shook her head. "No. Sit. If you want." The phrasing mattered. He noticed it immediately. He sat. They drank their coffee without comment for a minute. Emily watched the room, not him, which he appreciated. When she finally spoke, it wasn't what he expected. "Do you know what today is?" she asked. James's fingers tightened around the mug. "Yes." She nodded once. "Okay." That was it. No follow-up. No smile that suggested hidden intentions. "You're not going to say anything else?" he asked. "I wanted to check first," she said. "You don't like surprises." "No. And you don't like being put in a position where you're required to react." "Correct." "So," Emily said calmly, "I won't do that." Relief and unease arrived together. They sat in silence again, longer this time. James felt the weight of the moment pressing in, not from her, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of being acknowledged without being handled. After a while, Emily reached into her coat pocket and placed something on the table between them. A small envelope. James stiffened. "I didn't agree to." "I know," she said gently. "You don't have to open it." He stared at the envelope as if it might detonate. "What is it?" he asked. "A choice," she replied. "If you want it." He frowned. "Explain." "It's an invitation," Emily said. "To do something today. Or not. You decide. No obligation. No expectations. If you say no, I'll throw it away." James considered her words carefully, testing them for pressure. Finding none. "And if I say yes?" he asked. "Then we do the thing," she said. "And that's all it means." He picked up the envelope, surprised by how light it was. "What's the thing?" "You have to open it to find out." He hesitated, then slid a finger under the flap and pulled out a single card. "Walk with me. No destination. 1 hour. You choose when it ends." That was all. James looked up. "That's it. That's it. No cake. No crowd. No singing. No declarations. Just movement and time, both of which he controlled. "I can leave whenever I want," he said. "Yes. And you won't be offended." "No. And you won't bring it up later." "Not unless you do." He exhaled slowly. "You're very careful." "I'm very respectful," Emily corrected. "There's a difference." James sat back, the chair creaking softly beneath him. For reasons he didn't fully understand, his throat felt tight. "I don't usually do this," he said. She smiled faintly. "I know." After a moment, he stood. 1 hour. Emily rose with him, slipping her coat back on. "Lead the way." They walked without hurry, letting the city unfold around them. James chose side streets, quieter paths, places without memory attached. Emily didn't ask questions. She matched his pace, adjusted when he slowed, waited when he stopped to observe something. A mural half covered in graffiti. A stray cat perched on a stoop like it owned the block. At one point, she said, "You see things." "I notice what's there," he replied. "Most people don't." They crossed a small park dusted with early spring buds. Children played at the far end, their laughter distant enough to be harmless. "You don't talk much about your past," Emily said. Not probing, just stating. "I don't see the utility." "Do you see the cost?" James thought of empty kitchens, of learning to be quiet so no one would expect him. Sometimes. They reached a bench overlooking the river. James checked his watch. 43 minutes. "We can stop," Emily said. He shook his head. "We still have time." They sat anyway. For a while, neither spoke. The wind off the water was cool, steady. James felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not joy, not sadness. Presence. "My parents never celebrated my birthday," he said suddenly. Emily didn't react. She waited. So I learned it wasn't important, he continued. That I wasn't important enough to mark time around. She turned to him then, her expression careful. That's a heavy lesson for a child. It was practical. Practical doesn't mean harmless. He considered that. It taught me self-reliance. And isolation, she added softly. He didn't argue. When the hour ended, James stood first. That was acceptable. Emily smiled. High praise again. They walked back toward the cafe, then parted ways without ceremony. No hug, no promise. As James headed home, he realized something unsettling. For the first time in his life, his birthday had passed without noise or obligation. And it had mattered. Not because it was celebrated, but because someone had let him choose how it was acknowledged and stayed anyway. The lesson unsettled him. And for once, he didn't push the feeling away. Chapter 6. The Cost of Solitude. The call came on Tuesday at 1:36 p.m. Just as James was finishing the last of a late lunch he hadn't planned to eat. His phone vibrated once against the kitchen counter. He glanced at it, expecting nothing, and frowned when he saw Linda's name. He let it ring. The vibration stopped. Silence returned. James exhaled, rinsed his plate, and told himself that was the end of it. It wasn't. The phone rang again 10 minutes later. This time he answered. James, Linda said, relief bleeding into her voice before she could stop it. Thank you for picking up. What do you need? He asked, not unkindly, but without warmth. She hesitated. I owe you an apology. He leaned back against the counter. You've already decided that. Yes, she said, but I want you to hear it. He waited. We shouldn't have done that, Linda continued. The party. We crossed a line. I should have known better. You should have asked, James said. You're right. The admission surprised him. There's more, she added. We didn't lose the client. Your work saved the account. The board noticed. I'm glad, James said. For the team. For you, Linda corrected. They want you back. James closed his eyes briefly. No. James? No, he repeated. I don't return to places where I've already been misunderstood. We do things differently, she insisted. Clearer boundaries. No personal nonsense. That's not a guarantee, he replied. That's an intention. Silence stretched between them. Is it about trust? Linda asked quietly. It's about precedent. I see, she said, and this time he believed her. If you change your mind, the offer stands. I won't, James said gently now. But thank you for the apology. When the call ended, the apartment felt smaller. James stood there longer than necessary, staring at the blank wall above the counter. He had expected relief, closure. Instead, what settled in his chest felt like loss, measured, reasonable, and real. He had walked away from stability without hesitation. That part hadn't changed. What unsettled him was the question he hadn't asked himself until now. At what cost? The cafe was quieter that afternoon. Emily wasn't there when James arrived, and for once, the absence registered as disappointment rather than neutrality. He ordered his coffee and sat at the window table alone, watching pedestrians pass, each of them tethered to someone or something. Phones, companions, destinations. At 2:14, the door opened and Emily stepped inside, wind-tousled and flushed from the cold. She spotted him immediately. Hey, she said, smiling as she slid into the chair across from him. You look like you lost an argument. I won, James replied. That's not what your face says. He considered deflecting. Didn't. My former boss called, he said. They offered my job back. Emily's expression shifted, attentive but careful. And I did. She nodded slowly. How do you feel about that? I don't regret it. That wasn't the question. He exhaled. I feel aware. Of what? That choices accumulate. Emily smiled faintly. They do. They drank their coffee in silence for a moment. You ever wonder, James said, whether solitude stops being a preference and starts being a habit? Emily looked at him then, really looked at him. Yes. The single word carried weight. You speak like someone who's been there, he said. She hesitated, then nodded. I was married. James blinked. Were? Yes. He waited. He needed me, Emily continued, all the time, for validation, for direction, for reassurance that he existed in the world. At first, it felt like purpose. And then, James asked, and then it felt like erosion, she said simply. Every boundary I set was treated like rejection. Every quiet moment became a problem to solve. That sounds exhausting. It was. She smiled ruefully. When we divorced, people told me I'd regret it, that I'd be lonely. Were you? Yes, she said without hesitation. But it was quieter, and I could hear myself again. James nodded. That matters. It does, she agreed. But solitude isn't neutral either. He frowned. You said before it's everything. I said everything is temporary, she corrected, including isolation. James watched her fingers trace the rim of her mug, steady and unassuming. "You don't push," he said. "I don't pull," she replied. "There's a difference." They sat with that. After a while, Emily spoke again. "Can I ask you something difficult?" "You're going to anyway," he said, though without edge. "Why is being needed so threatening to you?" James opened his mouth, then stopped. The answer rose unbidden, clear and uncomfortable. "Because," he said slowly, "need turns into expectation, and expectation turns into disappointment, and disappointment turns into blame." Emily nodded. "That's a lot to carry alone." "I learned early that no one was coming," James said. "So I stopped waiting." She didn't interrupt. "If I don't rely on anyone," he continued, "then no one can fail me, and I can't fail them." "That sounds safe," Emily said. "It is. And lonely." He didn't argue. They left the cafe together, walking in the same direction for once. The air was cold, sharp enough to keep them moving. At the corner, Emily stopped. "I'm going to the bookstore." James paused. "I'm going home." She nodded. "Okay." He took a step, then stopped. "Emily." "Yes. If I hadn't learned that lesson so early," he said, choosing each word with care, "I don't know who I'd be." She smiled softly. "You wouldn't be you. You'd be someone else. That doesn't mean this version can't learn something new." He studied her face, the absence of expectation in her eyes. "I don't promise change," he said. "I don't ask for it," she replied. They parted ways without touching, without ceremony. As James walked home, the city felt different again. Not louder, not quieter, but fuller. He realized something then with a clarity that startled him. Solitude had never been the problem. The problem was believing it was the only option that didn't come with a cost. And for the first time, James wasn't sure he was willing to keep paying it. Chapter 7. Letting someone do something. James noticed the change on Wednesday morning. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. He woke at his usual time, made his coffee, and stood at the counter staring at the same patch of wall he'd stared at for years. The ritual should have steadied him. Instead, it felt incomplete, like a sentence missing its final punctuation. He didn't reach for his coat right away. That, in itself, was new. For most of his life, James had structured his days around avoidance. Avoiding attention, avoidance disguised as efficiency, efficiency disguised as virtue. Now that the immediate pressure of work was gone, the patterns were exposed. He could see the grooves he'd worn into his own life, how reliably he returned to them. The thought didn't frighten him. It intrigued him. By 10:12, he was out the door. The cafe greeted him with the same warmth it always had. But today he didn't scan the room for Emily. He ordered his coffee and took the window table alone, deliberately, as if to remind himself that he could still choose solitude without it choosing him back. He had just lifted the mug to his lips when a shadow fell across the table. "You look like someone trying very hard not to look like someone waiting," Emily said. James didn't look up. "You're late. By 4 minutes." She slid into the chair. "That's practically early." He met her eyes, searching for the familiar lightness. It was there, but something else too. Curiosity, sharpened. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes. That wasn't my question." He considered deflecting, then didn't. "I've been thinking." Emily smiled. "Dangerous activity." "About what you said," he continued. "That solitude isn't neutral. And that I've been treating it like a moral position." She leaned back, thoughtful. "Self-reliance as identity." "Yes. That can get heavy," she said. "Carrying yourself like a principle instead of a person." James huffed a quiet laugh. "You make it sound ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous," Emily replied gently. "It's understandable." They drank in silence for a moment. "James," she said, "can I do something today?" The phrasing stopped him cold. "Do something for me?" he asked carefully. "With you," she corrected. "But only if you want." His first instinct was refusal. Automatic, reflexive. The way his hand used to reach for his badge even after he'd left the job. "What is it?" he asked. "I'm moving a bookshelf," she said. "It's heavy. I could hire someone. I could ask a friend. Or I could ask you." The request sat between them, unadorned. "I don't owe you anything," he said. "I know. And if I help, that doesn't create debt." Emily finished. "No. How can you be sure?" "Because I'm not keeping score," she said. "And neither are you. Not today." James stared into his coffee. This was exactly the scenario he avoided. Someone asking directly without drama. No manipulation. No leverage. Just a need stated plainly. "I can say no," he said. "Yes. And you won't be offended." "No. And you won't reinterpret it later." "James," she said softly, "I'm not trying to trap you." That was the problem. He nodded once. "All right." Emily smiled, not triumphant. Relieved. Her apartment was 6 blocks away. They walked side by side, conversation light, unforced. James noticed how easily she filled silence without crowding it, how she matched his pace without comment. The bookshelf was solid oak and stubborn. They maneuvered it through a narrow hallway with careful coordination, pausing when James raised a hand, adjusting when Emily suggested a shift. Took longer than expected. Neither complained. When they set it in place, Emily leaned against the wall and exhaled. Thank you. James wiped his hands on his coat sleeves. You're welcome. She didn't add anything else. No gratitude layered with meaning. Just acknowledgement that, more than the physical effort, left him unsettled. Coffee? She asked. At your place. Yes. I don't usually. I know, she said. We can skip it. James hesitated, then nodded. 1 cup. The coffee was weaker than his, flavored with something citrusy. He grimaced slightly. Don't like it? Emily asked. It's different. She laughed. You can say bad. It's not bad, he said. It's just not what I expect. They sat at her small kitchen table, the bookshelf visible through the doorway, now neatly in place. Emily leaned her elbows on the table, studying him with an expression that wasn't interrogation so much as interest. You know what you did today? She asked. I moved furniture. You let someone need you, she corrected. And you didn't disappear afterward. James frowned. I'm still here. That's what I mean. He considered that. The act hadn't felt dangerous. It hadn't cost him anything tangible. And yet, it had shifted something internal, like loosening a knot he hadn't realized was tight. I didn't feel trapped, he admitted. Emily smiled. That's the point. They talked for a while longer about unremarkable things, her work with a small nonprofit, his thoughts on consulting work, the merits of owning fewer possessions than shelves to put them on. When James stood to leave, the old reflex stirred. Exit cleanly, leave no impression. Emily, he said, stopping near the door. Yes. I won't always say yes, he said. I hope not, she replied. That wouldn't be honest. And I might retreat. Sometimes. She nodded. So will I. The symmetry of that pleased him. As he walked home, James replayed the afternoon in his mind. Not with analysis, but with curiosity. He realized something then, simple and disarming. Letting someone do something for you wasn't the same as surrendering yourself to them. Need didn't have to be a trap. Could be a moment. And moments, unlike obligations, could be chosen again or not. For the first time in a very long while, James found himself wondering what he might choose next. Chapter 8. The Risk of Staying. James didn't go to the cafe the next day. Not because he was retreating, exactly. Retreat implied fear. This was evaluation. He had spent most of his life assessing risk before committing to anything that couldn't be undone, and while the last few weeks hadn't felt dangerous, they had felt cumulative. Connections had a way of doing that. They stacked quietly, one moment at a time, until they weighed something down. He spent the morning answering emails he didn't have to answer, reading articles he didn't finish, reorganizing a bookshelf he'd already organized. The day stretched long and shapeless, unmoored from deadlines or deliverables. At noon, he stood in the middle of his living room and realized he was restless. That was new, too. By mid-afternoon, he admitted what he'd been avoiding. He missed her. Not in a dramatic way. There was no ache, no longing that bent him out of shape. It was subtler than that, an absence of rhythm. Emily had slipped into his days without demanding space, and now the space she left behind was noticeable. That irritated him. At 3:40 p.m., his phone buzzed. Emily, didn't see you today. Just checking in. No reply required. James stared at the screen longer than necessary. She'd remembered his rules. No pressure. No guilt. Even the offer of silence was explicit. He typed, deleted, retyped. James, I'm fine. 3 seconds later, another message appeared. Emily, I figured. Want company anyway? He didn't respond immediately. He set the phone down, walked to the window, and looked out over the street. People moved with purpose, some together, some alone. No one looked like they had it figured out. That oddly comforted him. He picked up the phone. James, yes, but not the cafe. The reply came almost instantly. Emily, okay. Where? He hesitated. Then James, my place. The finality of that choice landed the moment he hit send. Emily, on my way. And James, 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. Emily, thank you for choosing. She arrived 20 minutes later, hair wind-tousled, cheeks flushed from the cold. James opened the door and stepped aside without ceremony. This is nice, she said, glancing around. Very you. That's not a compliment, he said. She smiled. It is. They stood awkwardly for a moment. Then James gestured toward the kitchen. Coffee? Yes. She leaned against the counter while he prepared it, watching without commentary. When he handed her a mug, their fingers brushed briefly. James noted it without reacting. They sat at opposite ends of the couch, a deliberate distance that felt respectful rather than defensive. You okay? Emily asked. Yes, that one I believe. He exhaled. I've been thinking about what you said, about solitude having a cost. And? She asked gently. And that staying alone is also a choice, he said. Not just the absence of one. Emily nodded. It is. And like any choice, it has consequences. Yes. He looked at her then, really looked at her, at the patience in her posture, the lack of expectation in her eyes. I don't know how to do this gradually, he said. I tend to either stay or leave. Emily considered that. Then maybe staying doesn't have to mean forever. James frowned. That sounds like a hedge. It's an allowance, she corrected. For uncertainty. They sat in silence, the room filled only with the low hum of the city outside. I don't want to disappear, James said finally. But I also don't want to wake up one day and realize I've given more than I intended. Emily shifted closer, not touching but nearer. Then don't give more than you choose. That's easier said than done. Not if we keep choosing, she replied. Out loud. The idea unsettled him. Also grounded him. He nodded once. All right. She smiled, soft and untriumphant. All right. They talked then, more openly than before, not about childhoods or traumas but about preferences and limits. James admitted he needed time alone without explanation. Emily admitted she needed honesty more than consistency. They negotiated nothing formal, but something mutual took shape in the space between words. As evening settled in, James realized he wasn't counting minutes. That realization startled him. I should go, Emily said eventually, standing. James stood as well. The old reflex urged him to open the door quickly, end the moment cleanly. He ignored it. Stay for dinner, he said instead, the words surprising them both. Emily blinked. Only if you want me to. I do. They cooked together in an easy, unremarkable way, nothing fancy, nothing symbolic. Just food, shared. When they sat down to eat, James felt something settle into place. Not certainty, not resolution, but acceptance. This was a risk. Not the loud kind. Not the catastrophic kind he'd spent his life avoiding. This was the quiet risk of staying present, of not withdrawing the moment something began to matter. As Emily laughed at something he said, actually laughed, James felt a flicker of something unfamiliar and steady. He didn't label it. He didn't analyze it. He stayed. Chapter 9. Nothing personal. Everything shared. James woke the next morning with Emily's presence still faintly in the apartment. Not her scent exactly, nothing so sentimental, but the impression of her. The mug she'd used sitting upside down in the drying rack, the chair at the table not quite pushed in, the subtle rearrangement of space that came from another person occupying it without trying to improve it. He noticed all of it. That too was new. He didn't feel crowded. He didn't feel invaded. What he felt was awareness. The same kind he'd felt after finishing a long project, when something that had required attention was suddenly complete and his mind hadn't yet adjusted. Emily hadn't stayed the night. That had been his choice, stated plainly, and she'd accepted it without pause or commentary. She hadn't tried to reframe it, hadn't softened it with reassurance or disappointment. She'd simply nodded, kissed his cheek once, brief, unceremonious, and left. The kiss lingered in his mind longer than he liked. James made coffee and sat at the table instead of standing. He stared at nothing in particular, letting his thoughts move without organizing them for once. He realized, with a quiet start, that he wasn't bracing himself. There was no internal checklist of risks, no rehearsal of exits. The world hadn't suddenly become safe, but it had become negotiable. That distinction mattered. At 10:30, he left the apartment. Not for the cafe. He walked with intention this time, not urgency, and found himself outside a small consulting firm he'd bookmarked weeks earlier but never contacted. He stood there for a full minute, considering. Then he went inside. Emily didn't text him until that evening. How did today go? No assumptions. No emotional framing. James stared at the message, then typed, I took a meeting. 3 dots appeared. That sounds significant, she replied. It was, he answered. I don't know yet if it was good. You don't have to decide today. He smiled faintly at that. I know. They met the next afternoon, not at the cafe, but at a quiet diner halfway between their apartments. It was a place James had frequented for years without telling anyone. A neutral zone, predictable and unremarkable. Emily noticed. You picked this, she said, sliding into the booth. Yes, that means something. It means I trust the menu. She laughed. I'll take it. They ordered, talked, ate. James found himself describing the meeting in more detail than he'd planned. The questions he'd asked, the boundaries he'd already set, the way he'd declined a team role without apology. Emily listened, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. You didn't compromise yourself, she said when he finished. No, he agreed. I clarified. That's different, she said. And harder. James watched her stir her coffee, thoughtful. I didn't do it for you. I know. I didn't even do it because of you. I know that too. He met her gaze. But I didn't do it without you. Emily smiled, soft and steady. That's usually how it works. They sat in companionable quiet, the hum of the diner wrapping around them. James realized he wasn't worried about what came next, not because he'd figured it out, but because he trusted the process of choosing. I'm not suddenly someone who wants to share everything, he said. Emily nodded. Good. I still need privacy. So do I. And I might never enjoy celebrations. She smiled. I can live with that. He hesitated. I don't want to be someone's project. I don't want to be someone's solution, she replied. The symmetry settled something in him. When they stood to leave, James reached for her hand. Not reflexively, not nervously, but deliberately. She took it without squeezing, without claiming. They walked together down the street, steps aligned more by choice than habit. James understood something then, finally. His life hadn't been empty. It had been sufficient. But sufficiency wasn't the same as fullness, and fullness didn't require surrender. It required presence, chosen, renewed, honest. As they reached the corner, Emily squeezed his hand once, light and brief. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. James considered the question not as a threat, not as a trap, but as what it was, an invitation. "Yes," he said, and for the first time in his life that answer wasn't defensive. It was simply true.